Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome. Let me start by introducing the ALP leadership team. I'm Bonnie O'Regan, and I've been with the ALP facilitator since 2012. I work collaboratively with Dr. Benjamin Marcus and Mr. Mike Reed, who couldn't be with us this evening, and Mrs. Tara Fogel, who is joining us from her science lab. As an ALP leadership team, our primary goal is to maintain multiple lines of communication with all stakeholders. We communicate on a regular basis, and so take note, when you communicate with one of us, you're communicating with all of us. During this session, I will be offering the most frequently asked questions that I receive after parents receive their scores. First of all, what do all of these scores mean? And how did the committee use these scores to determine the placement into the ALP classes? Finally, what are your next steps? The overarching goal is to answer the question all parents ask: how can I work with my child's teacher to help my child grow academically? But before we get into the scores and how they're used in the placement process, let's start with what is the Advanced Learning Program, better known as ALP. In the Greenwich Public Schools, it is our policy to provide a comprehensive educational program for all students. The Advanced Learning Program uses a content replacement and acceleration model for students who give evidence that there is a mismatch between their academic needs and instruction. What this means in plain language is students in grades 3, 4, and 5 receive their instruction in the reading, math, and/or science in the ALP classroom instead of in the general education classroom. Greenwich uses a 3-phase placement process to identify those specific academic student needs and match learners with their appropriate education. This graphic shows the full process. I know it looks overwhelming. It includes referral, assessment, and placement. But let's break it down. The referral phase is the direct procedure that enters a student into the evaluation phase. We learned about this back in March when I did my first parent meeting. In the evaluation phase, students take assessments that provide a multitude of information that is not already collected within the classrooms. Just a little background about the assessments. Criterion referenced tests like the Linkit benchmark and the Smarter Balanced Assessment are intended to measure how well a person has learned the material taught in a specific grade level or course. All test takers are expected to succeed. Norm reference tests, on the other hand, are made to compare test takers to a large group of others at the same age or grade. On these tests, it's expected that some students will perform well, most will perform at an average level, and a few will perform poorly. Both kinds of tests help provide helpful information in making instructional decisions to meet these needs. We use criterion reference tests that are gathered within the classroom, and we use norm reference tests within the ALP department for placement. Now let's look at each one of those and see how it is scored. The first type of assessment is an ability test. It is an age, which is age normed. The ability test we use is the cognitive abilities test, better known as the COGAT. The COGAT evaluates relationships, systems thinking, and cognitive ability in 2 symbol systems, words and numbers. These are the same samples that we talked about in March. Scores are age normed and are reported out as standard age scores. That standard age score is used to show how students taking the COGAT compare in rate and level of cognitive development to other students within their same age group. The second type of assessment we give is an achievement assessment, which measures what students know and what they're ready to learn next. The test we use for this is the NWEA Measures of Academic Progress. NWEA is a computer adaptive test. If a child answers a question correctly, the next question is more challenging. If they answer incorrectly, the next one is easier, adapting so students are answering questions correctly 50% of the time. The goal is to assess the student's understanding of reading, math, or science concepts at and above grade level. When a student completes an NWEA assessment, he or she receives a RIT score as a result. RIT is an abbreviation for Roche unit. The difficulty and complexity of every unique question that the students get is measured using a RIT scale. A student's final RIT score indicates the level at which the student was answering these questions correctly 50% of the time. Note that each subject area has a unique RIT scale. As a result, the scores between the reading, the math, and the science are not equivalent. The last type of assessment we use are performance assessments. I'm sure you noticed in the samples that we've given is that the questions in the COGAT and the NWEA are either multiple choice or ask students to construct a specific answer in a specific way. So whereas the COGAT answers the question, how well are you reasoning? And the NWEA answers the question, do you know it? Performance assessments help answer the question, how well can you use your reasoning and what you know to generate your own knowledge? In reading, students are asked to read a short piece of literature and then asked 4 questions. Students' responses are scored on their demonstrated ability to analyze and interpret the text on a 4-point rubric. In math, students are given a set of 8 questions intended to assess students' capacity to select and deploy their mathematical knowledge in a non-routine context. Student scores are reported out as a number of questions they're able to answer correctly within that given amount of time. So, and upon completion of all of these assessments, now we move into the placement phase. In the placement phase, test scores are further analyzed. A Z-score is calculated for each assessment. What is a Z-score, you ask? A Z-score describes the position of a score in terms of its distance from the mean when measured in standard deviation units. The Z-score is positive, it lies above the mean. If it is negative, it lies below the mean. It is useful to standardize the scores of a normal distribution by converting them to Z-scores because they enable us to compare scores that are from different scales. Remember, the COGAT, the NWEA, and the performance tests all use different scales, and it allows us to analyze each one of those together. As the formula shows, a Z-score is simply the raw score minus the population mean, in this case our population of Greenwich, divided by the population standard deviation. The value of the Z-score tells you how many standard deviations you are away from the mean. If a Z-score is equal to 0, it's right at the mean. The Z-scores for each of the assessments are then averaged. Note, the COGAT composite standard age score is not an average of the COGAT verbal composite, the COGAT verbal standard age score, and the COGAT quantitative standard age score. It is derived directly from the verbal and quantitative battery scores and not an average of those 2 standard age scores. These average Z-scores are then ranked and a score profile is created for every student. These score reports are reviewed by a group of teachers, administrators, and members of the ALP leadership team at what we call a building advisory committee. The purpose of this meeting is to analyze that full body of evidence and use professional judgment to make placement recommendations for every student. As a team, we are looking for compelling evidence that there is a mismatch between a student's academic need and instruction. Students are initially recommended to the ALP classes if their average Z-score places them within the top 10% of district achievement or the top 10% of building achievement. Additional information that may impact the placement decision is provided by parents, testing proctors, administrators, and teachers. Parents were invited to provide input during the referral process for the committee to consider. On the form, parents ranked the frequency of observations on 5 behavioral characteristics and were asked to provide examples. Teacher observations were also considered in making recommendations. Observations are based upon the characteristics and behaviors as defined on the gifted behaviors continuum. Now, students who have a disability that qualifies them from an individualized education plan or a 504 plan may be twice exceptional and present the characteristics in a slightly different way. Observations of these behaviors are also considered when making placement recommendations. That final placement recommendation is based upon that combination of objective test data performance and the subjective judgment and reflect the team's best professional judgment to meet each child's individual need. Students routinely instruct, differentiate, provide modifications and extension opportunities for every student to succeed in their classrooms. Now, this entire placement process is completed every spring as kids grow in different ways and at their very own pace. I'd like to thank you once again for your attention tonight and extend an invitation to you to ask questions at this time. Now, the ALP leadership team is happy to answer any questions you have about your individual child. But to facilitate the most timely response to your questions, please use this inquiry form, which Tara was so kind to answer a fake question for us, and link it into our Q&A. All questions are made through the inquiry form will, before the end of the school day, will be answered within one school day of receipt. Once school is out, then they will be responded to on a case-by-case basis based upon the staff available. Any questions?
I'll read them as they come in, Bonnie. And if we have any members in the crowd today who would like to ask for the link to the inquiry form, I'd be happy to paste it back into the chat so that you have a clickable link. We wouldn't want anyone to have to type that into a browser window.
It's also hyperlinked in the letters that they received.
Yes.
And we will add it to the, we will also add a link on the website when we upload the, when we upload the presentation. Tara's our website queen. Any questions?
All right. Does the NWEA ask only concepts that have been presented, or are kids expected to answer questions for concepts they have never seen?
As a norm referenced assessment that's adaptive, it does adapt until the students are able to answer questions 50% of the time correctly and 50% incorrectly. So they will see questions of concepts that they have not already seen, that they've not already been presented with. It's not a criterion referenced assessment.
Is it an or scenario, i.e. top 10% scores, or if not in the 10% at that grade, then at that school?
Yes, I take the top 10% in the district, and then I look at the top 10% within that school. So there are some schools that may have 15% of their kids that score in the top 10% of the district. Those students will all be placed, whereas other schools will have 10% that are within their building. I should note that we're not restricted to the 10%. We do use the subjective data also, the observations. Any questions? I see some familiar names here, and I see that there's a couple people who've asked individual questions through the form.
We do have one question that just came up. Last
Oh,
year, you had only 2 kids from 3rd grade from JC, so how does that play into then the 10%?
oh, so the students who are currently in were factored into the 10% that we were looking at for this year.
Peter, does that answer your question?
Or do you mean that why did we take less than 10% last year? It may have been that kids moved out, movement, etc.
Okay. And Wendy Browning asks, what does it tell us about a kid who crushes their COGAT, but not the NWEA or the problem solving? What can we learn about our students with this data, or students in general?
The way that I look at that is that if I see one high score and the other one's a little bit lower, I think about it in the same way that I looked at it as a mother. I always knew that I was going to have to buy new pants because I had to buy new shoes. Their feet are going to grow before their height. And so with the COGAT, their reasoning is developed there, and they're ready to start learning that new material. They haven't gotten there yet. You don't need to buy the new pants quite yet, but they're ready for that. They will get there.
Okay. Rosa asks, I want to know how many children enter the program.
I don't know that off the top of my head. We will include that in the board report that we will be giving in October, and this year's numbers were included in this year's October report.
Follow up. How do we get new material with general classroom? So if a student is recommended to not be placed in ALP, but did well on one of their assessments, what do we do with our general classroom teachers to support that student's need? I think that's what you're saying, Wendy.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so what we do is this is part of the building advisory committee is that we talk about those students and each student's needs. And we also provide a really rich curriculum across the board so that there are enrichment opportunities for every student within the classroom. And the information that we gather through the assessments do help to help those teachers help differentiate more accurately for those students.
Ria asks, will the same teacher teach all all 3 ALP classes in 3rd grade? Will they get homework from separate from regular class homework? I think the clarification is that it's 1 grade 3 ALP class, or are they saying 3 ALP sections?
Oh, so is it the same teacher that teaches reading, math, and science in 3rd grade ALP? Sometimes not. That's a building level scheduling decision. Matters on how the building it works best for the students in that building as to how that's scheduled. The homework that they will be getting for math, science, and reading will come from their ALP teacher because that will be their math, reading, or science teacher.
Peter asks, how has COVID and the loss of half of school in 2020 impacted scores?
I have not seen a change in the scores due to COVID, but we do norm every year. So the students that we're looking at right now, the students that are being compared when I'm looking at those Z scores, I'm looking at the Z scores for this group of students and that same group of students in Greenwich. So they've all had that same experience.
Along with the actual scores against the average that a particular student got, can we get the actual percentile as well? John, I'm going to ask you to fill out the Google form with that question with your student's name, and Bonnie can reach back out to you with that specific information. I'm going to type the form link into my answer so you see that.
Yeah, I will give you your individual child's Z-scores.
Okay, 30 more seconds in
Alright.
case people are typing. Oh, I knew it.
Oh, okay.
The content that is covered in the ALP classes, will they cover content from the current grade the child is in, as well as content in the next grade? I'm asking because I'm curious as to how the kids on standardized testing do for their grades once in the ALP program. Do you want me to give that a stab, Bonnie? Only because I'm reading it.
Yeah, I'm just right.
It's
And
different in different grade in different content. So we know that the ALP program in mathematics is an acceleration model where you do cover curriculum from current grade as well as the next grade over. For example, grade 3 ALP is all of 3rd grade math and half of 4th grade math if you're in grade 3 ALP math. With that being said, we understand that our students master all the content they need in the grade level that they are going to be assessed in. We find that our ALP testers do incredibly well on our standardized tests. This goes across all content, so our ELA and our math. When we are looking at science, this will be the first year NGSS scores where we have had science within the STEM ALP block. And next year science will be pulled out, so we'll be sure to monitor that. Kristen, did that answer your question? Yes, perfect. Okay.
okay, thank you.
And then,
Rosa, Tara, do you mind copying and pasting the
yep,
form?
got it.
So if you put that in, then I will make sure that I will look that up. I want to make sure that I capture it. So if you send that to me, I'll get that sent. I will find the scores.
And Bonnie, at the end of this meeting, we'll get a download of the questions. Is that correct, Mike? We get all the questions?
I can supply that, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see some people are dropping off.
Yeah,
I'm
if you
glad
have
that we were able to answer all of your questions.
And again, the Google form for
Thanks.
inquiry will be on your emails as well as our website. You have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Wendy.